Good evening all and welcome. Thank you to my wonderful members who got to select today's video. If you'd like to have some exclusive perks, check out Patreon or the join button to find out more. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I was about 6 years old, around 2004, my mom and I started taking my sister to Dr. Daniel's pediatric dental office. The dental center was located inside a giant yellow mansion that also doubled as Dr. Daniel's house. It was honestly gorgeous. When I first started going to the dentist, I was extremely shy and actually suffered from selective mutism and had a lot of autistic-like tendencies. Needless to say, I relied heavily on my mother's comfort and for someone to give me a voice because it was extremely anxiety-inducing for me to speak to strangers, especially men, for some reason. When my sister and I got called in from the waiting room, my mum followed us to the office until she was told by Dr. Daniels that parents were not allowed to be with their children as it taught kids independence, to which my mum complied. Once in there, he immediately separated my sister and I. In reaction to that, I cried as I felt so scared. Dr. Daniels did not like crying, so he grabbed me and put his hands over my mouth and nose and shook me, and aggressively warned me that if I continued to cry and scare the other kids, he would make my situation a lot worse. Obviously, this scared me even more, so I started to cry again. Dr. Daniels had enough and took me into his house part of the dentist office, where he screamed at me again, grabbed me by the neck and shoved me. His hygienist Judy came over and told me that if I continued to cry, she would spank me so hard I wouldn't know what had hit me. Afterwards, he gave me a juice concoction and left me alone in his house for 5 minutes until he took me back into the dental office and worked on my teeth. I guess I just instinctively knew that if I wanted to survive, I had to act like I was not terrified and hold in all the tears. All I wanted was my mummy. After the first appointment, my sister and I told my mum we were scared of the dentist and that he was a mean man, but she just shook it off as being an anxious child and we continued to see him. Each visit was terrifying. Every time we pulled into the mansion, my heart had a meltdown inside and my chest was terrified. The house was no longer pretty to look at. Every time we went to see dentist Dr. Daniels, or the tooth man as he called himself, always had us have heavy dental work procedures done. We had seals done on several baby teeth and plenty of teeth removed with some of his fingers with no regard for pain level at all. And often, when having a tooth removed or seals done to your mouth, you had to be opened up with a retractor, and he would leave us there for about 45 minutes before he came and worked on our teeth. Sometimes he would eat his lunch while we sat there with our mouths wide open. Probably one of the worst pains I've ever felt in my life. I remember one time when I was in 3rd grade, I had been leaned down in a chair waiting with the retractor for an hour. I was in so much pain I couldn't take it. I sat in the chair and started to scream and cry as loud as I could. Dr. Daniels came rushing over, angry as could be, took the retractors off, took me back to the house part again where he screamed at me for being a big baby and scaring all the other kids. I was so sad in myself because I hadn't cried in so long. He then took me back to the dentist chair and pinned me down to the seat in a straitjacket. He put my retractors back on and said that I would have to wait longer because I caused such a scene. All I could do was shed silent tears and drool everywhere, and I couldn't even wipe it because he locked my arms. Afterwards, my mouth would become so swollen and filled with rashes it hurt to talk for days. It would leave bruises and swells as soon as I left his chair. He would often tell my mother I was a difficult patient if I so much as winced at his torture. Once he removed 6 of my teeth at once and I could barely eat. While he ripped out teeth, he would often sing songs. It was so Sweeney Todd-like. When I was in 7th grade, I started getting some new braces, and we started seeing an orthodontist. Not long after, we stopped seeing Dr. Dan and started seeing a new dentist who was actually nice. I had never known that getting your teeth cleaned didn't have to feel like going through a saw trap. I think my mum took us out of Dr. Dan's practice when the orthodontist looked at our dental records and saw a lot of unnecessary procedures being done on our mouths. Not long ago, I was having a conversation with a friend about our childhood fears, and instantly my mind went to the tooth man. Curious, I googled him to see what happened to him, and to my happiness, the practice was shut down. Also left under his name was a Yelp page that was still left up. The page was filled with numerous one-star reviews from former patients that were once abused as kids in his office, using the page as an outlet to express their trauma. I started to cry because their experiences were so close and some identical to what I went through as a kid. It was so sad, but at the same time really validating to know I wasn't alone. A lot of the procedures we went through were just a scam for him to collect money off our parents' insurance. And now that I think about it, he probably was so adamant on us not crying and screaming for help because he didn't want parents to hear and come and see what was going on. I shake thinking about this. I really pray that he hasn't opened up another practice somewhere. I know it's hard not to blame parents in this situation, but the truth is this man was a swift abuser. For every bruise and swell we had, he would have dental explanations that would make the parents feel stupid for asking. He was an authority figure, and I don't blame my mum for not believing us. She knew he was firm, but probably thought we were confusing firmness with meanness. To be honest, even recounting the torture was so wild it nearly sounds made up. She eventually did come around. She's not alone, as there were hundreds and hundreds of parents that were duped and deceived by him. To Dr. Dan, please, let's never meet again. And to any parent hearing this, if you're ever told to not go in with your child to an appointment, something really isn't right. This happened yesterday, and I'm still a little creeped out. I've had crooked teeth my whole life, and I really hadn't minded them that much. We couldn't afford braces, so I haven't been to an orthodontist at all. Well, recently my insurance let us know that if I needed braces, they would pay for most of the cost. It's state insurance, so we were surprised. My mum jumped at the offer, saying that I should straighten my teeth while I still had a chance before I'm a legal adult. So this was my first trip to the orthodontist. I think I should preface by saying that this office was tiny and looked over an old trailer attached to the side of a large building. We checked in and were led to a room. Everything seemed pretty normal. Well, before he even comes into the room, I hear the orthodontist ask his assistant, "What about tonight? Do you want to go for dinner tonight?" She sounded annoyed and replied, "No, someone's picking me up after work." It sounded like this had happened before. When he came into the room, the first thing he said was, "What's a cute kid like you doing in this place?" Okay. My mum glanced at me for a minute before talking to the doctor. He's just straight up staring at me while she talks to him until he crosses the room to look at pictures of my teeth. He says, "You have beautiful, beautiful teeth." I took it as a compliment the first 5 times he said it until he added, "Man, I wish those were in my mouth." The commentary after this was equally weird. He kept saying things like, "You're already beautiful, why do you need straight teeth?" And, "We can't make your teeth straight. We'd have to beat off the boys with a stick." Exact words. Keep in mind this man is over 70 and I'm 16 and look young for my age. This comment was the one that really kind of topped the night off. He put his gloves on and these were his exact words. "Okay, I'm going to slide my fingers in your mouth now. I know they taste good and you can lick, but you can't bite." He giggled. I mean, what the hell? It didn't really get creepier than that, but I don't really know how it could. He talked to my mom for a few minutes about my dentist, said I had beautiful teeth a few more times, and finally left. I don't know if I'm overreacting or misinterpreting, but this really freaked me out. My mom wants me to see another orthodontist, and I hope we can. We're going to try and call our insurance provider and hopefully they switch. A week or so before my 10th birthday, I walked to the corner store with a $10 bill and picked up a jar of ragu for my mum. On my way home, a man I'd never seen before fell in step with me and began talking. "Hi," he said cheerfully. "My name's Dr. Ramsey. I'm a pediatrician. Do you know what a pediatrician is?" I walked along silently, not replying, and fervently hoping he would just take that as a sign he should leave me alone. Subtleties were not his strong suit, though, because he kept right on chattering. "Are your parents looking for a pediatrician for you? Of course. You're almost a big girl now. You'll be needing another kind of doctor soon, won't you? That's okay, though. They can still bring you to me until then. What's your name? You have beautiful hair. I was just on my way to get some suckers from the candy jar in my office. Do you like suckers?" Thankfully, we were nearing my house, so I ran forward, up the steps, and in through the kitchen door. I didn't know it then, but that was the beginning of a very long, very scary ordeal. It didn't take long after that for Dr. Ramsey to begin showing up. At first, it seemed benign enough, at least to a kid. He would drive by nearby every day, smiling and waving. I told my mum, who said maybe it was on his way home from work. But then the phone calls began. My dad called me into the living room and sat me down. He asked me about the day Dr. Ramsey followed me home and if I spoke to him. He said I wasn't in trouble, but that I needed to tell him the truth. I told him no, and he asked if I was sure, and that if I could be forgetting something. I told him no again, and he frowned and then asked, "Then how does he know your name?" I didn't know. It turns out that wasn't all he knew. He knew my sister's name as well. Pretty soon, neither my sister or I were allowed to answer the phone. He called several times a day. At first, neither of us knew what he was saying. Then one night, one of my brothers told us he was telling my parents that he was going to hurt me and later my sister. Things got complicated after that. My dad had called the police, but this was before there were any stalking laws. There was not a lot they could do. They told my parents to call back if he tried anything. My dad then called a friend of his from back in the day who happened to be a cop, and for the next month, my dad's friend escorted me to and from school. Suddenly, life as I knew it came screeching to a halt. I couldn't walk to school alone anymore, I couldn't play outside, and I couldn't walk to Super America, sort of a 7-Eleven for those who don't know. When access to me was completely denied, things escalated. It was around this time he began threatening my sister too. Then one afternoon, my sister, two of my brothers, my mum and I were in the kitchen. One of my brothers saw a glimpse of someone in the garage. They'd seen him too. Dr. Ramsey came bolting out the garage. My brothers chased after him, and they ran all the way to Cherokee Park, where they lost him in the trees. My parents called the police, but nothing ever came of it. The only information they had was a description and a name that was almost certainly fake. A few weeks later, we woke to find our dog hanging from the side porch. She was a gorgeous saddleback German shepherd born the same day I was. We were all devastated. The cops said there was no evidence it was him and ruled it accidental, but none of us believed it. His phone calls became more informative in the meantime. He would talk about who was home and who wasn't. If my brother and I would say my dad was home, he would tell him who was really in the house. He also would talk to us about the house itself, the windows in the kitchen that he could easily open with a knife from the outside even if it were locked, and about the French doors that connected the living room to the side porch, and how the lock can be fangled from the outside if you jiggle it just right. That night, my dad put in some carpenter nails in the bottom of the French doors until he could get a new lock ordered. My parents had to go to a company event for my dad's work. My older brothers were at St. West roller skating ice rink. My sister was on the phone with her best friend, and my little brother was on the floor asleep. I was watching Devo on Midnight Special with Wolfman Jack. It was late. Suddenly, the top of the French door swung inwards, and in the few milliseconds before the nails in the bottom caused them to snap back, I could see his silhouette. My sister whipped the phone at the television, and we ran up the stairs. About halfway up, we realized our little brother was still asleep on the living room floor. As quietly as we could, we slipped back downstairs to get him. We all went to our bedrooms and didn't turn on the lights. This way we could see outside. We watched the window for a while, and when we didn't find him, we crept down the hall to our brother's room to look. We looked down and could see someone standing at the back door. He knocked loudly. "What do you want?" my sister asked out the window. He stepped back and said, "Is this the Mercy residence? I have a pizza delivery. Can you come to the door?" She scoffed at him, declaring she wasn't stupid, and she could see he didn't have a pizza and she was calling the cops. He left. A short while later, my brothers returned home and we told them what happened, and they walked around the yard watching for him. They came back in and things settled down. By now we'd pretty much given up calling the cops because it never helped. So we just went back in, each of us except my youngest brother who was still asleep, carrying a weapon from the kitchen in case. Eventually, one of my brothers went to the kitchen to get a bowl of cereal as a snack. You know that sensation you get when you can just feel someone watching you? Yeah, he had gotten that. He kept looking around the kitchen through the doorways in the dining room at the window. He didn't see anything, but he could feel eyes on him. So he went closer to the door to try and see better. The kitchen lights were reflecting on the windows of the door, as it had 3 rows of 3 windows, so he couldn't really see. He stepped closer and closer again until he was right up against the door, cupped his hands on either side of his head so that he could see. And there on the other side of the window pane was Dr. Ramsay smiling back. He turned to yell for my older brothers, and when he looked back again he was gone. They went out again to look for him but didn't see him. The next night we were at the table playing Crazy Eights, and my brother was restless. My sister asked him what was wrong, and he said he always felt like any minute there would be a boom at the door or window. And almost immediately after he finished his sentence there was one, the window right behind us, and in the chaos the 2 eldest ran out, but he was already gone. A few weeks later I was at school, and we were outside on the playground during recess. I was swinging upside down when I saw that now familiar blue Ford Galaxy cruising by, moving slowly. There he was, smiling and waving, calling me by name. I ran to my teacher and told her, and the school had been told about him, and she took me inside right away to call my mum. That same day my mum had gotten a call from the school, asking her to verify that my dad was picking me up, as he called to say that he was on his way. Not long after that I woke up one night thirsty. I went down to the kitchen for a drink, and there, sitting alone in the dark, was my dad, on the table, with a firearm. He was tired of the police waiting until Dr. Ramsay tried something. He was tired of his children being terrorized. He was tired of being afraid every time he left for work that something would happen to us while we were gone. I sat with him for a while, watching, before he sent me back to bed. These events and many more took place over a period of around 18 months. Then as suddenly as it began, it was over. He had vanished from our lives, the phone calls, the drive-by with creepy waves and everything. For a long time during and after the Dr. Ramsay days, I would have a recurring nightmare in which I would wake up to find him standing over me as I slept. It took a long time before I felt like a kid again. I found out years later that when he was calling, Dr. Ramsay would tell my parents that he was going to end my life and do horrific things to me, and later my sister, and there was nothing we could do about it. I don't know what happened to him when he disappeared. I don't know if he was in a car wreck, locked in prison in a coma, but sometimes I wonder if the wait ended for my dad when he was sitting in the darkened kitchen one night. I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to. When I was younger, I used to spend a lot of time in the children's ward. I had a very rare and difficult to manage condition which I don't really want to get into. Point being, I was in there a lot. I remember one night I couldn't sleep. I was feeling pretty scared. I was only around 8, and I really missed my mum and dad. Anyway, I was lying there in bed tossing and turning, and the door opens and in comes this doctor I'd never seen. To anyone who's been in a hospital for a long extended period of time, You do get to know the people who work there, and oftentimes they're quite nice. The doctor came in, had a nice conversation with me, asked me about my likes and interests and a few other random tidbits of my life. He had a very nice and gentle smile, and I smiled back. Just before he was going to leave, he asked me if I could see something that fell on the floor, like a pen or a lid or something that he asked me for. So I just gently looked over the bed to see if I could reach it with my hand, but couldn't see anything. The moment I turned back to inform him of this, he was gone. Just to let you know, the door in my ward always remained closed, so there's no way he could have opened it and left in that split second without me seeing. I try and dismiss it, thinking that maybe he had an urgent patient he had to run to, and felt a lot better and managed to fall asleep. The next day, while speaking to one of the nurses, I ask her specifically if she knows the name of the doctor that came in last night. She asks me to describe the man, so I tell her that it was this guy. He was tall, quite dark, with dark hair, expressive brown eyes, and that's about as much I could muster at my young age. She gives me a puzzled look and says she doesn't know anyone by that description, but will ask around to see if another doctor had come in. But that was the last I heard of her. Years go by, my health improves, and one day I'm in the local Walmart with my mum. We're chatting with one of her friends as I'm waiting to pick out a CD that I was entitled to buy that weekend, when all of a sudden I see that nurse from years ago. She didn't recognize me, but I give her a smile, and as she walks by me she asks if I know her. I briefly tell her that I remembered her when I used to basically live at the hospital, and she gives me a little grin and says, "Wow, you've grown up so much." Just before she leaves, I ask her and say, "This has been on my mind for a long time, but did you ever find out the name of the doctor? I always wanted to thank him." At that point, her face kind of goes blank. She looks at me up and down, and I think she was assessing to see if I was old enough to handle the information she was about to give me. She tones down her voice a little bit and goes, "Listen, I didn't want to spook you as a kid, but that doctor that you saw died many years ago in a car accident on his way to work. They say his spirit sometimes still roams the halls of the hospital, and I think there was a very good chance you saw him that day. I'm not sure if you believe in ghosts or not, but it certainly scared the hell out of me." She said the last bit with a little laugh, gave me a pat on the shoulder, a smile, wished me and my mum good day, and went on her way. It left me curious. Was the nice doctor a phantom? In high school, I was a cheerleader, but I went to a school that actually took cheerleading very seriously. We did hours of conditioning, independent tumble classes, practice for hours after school, all the good stuff. I have a weird heart, so physicals were more in depth for me. My aunt worked at the clinic in our town, and she's the one who took me to my appointment. She's a goofy, loud, outspoken nurse, so all the doctors were very comfortable around her. After my physical was finished, the doctor stayed in our room and was just chatting with the both of us. I'd seen this doctor before, but he was being extra nice this time. I assumed because he was more comfortable because my aunt was in the room and he knew her well. He asked if my parents allowed me to date yet. I was 15 and they did, so I laughed and said yes, they did. He then asked me if I wanted to go on a date with him. I thought he was joking, because obviously I was a child, and this was a doctor who looked to be in his 30s. He was not. He legitimately wanted to ask me on a date, and my aunt thought I would be very excited because he was a doctor. I just felt grossed out. He had to have known my age. I was there for our high school sports physical. I was brace-faced and barely had breasts. This guy just had his hands all over me for this physical exam and wasn't being nice but flirting. I'm married with a toddler and a newborn now, and just find it ever more revolting now that I have kids. I randomly remembered this when cleaning out some stuff and found a wristband I had from the kids' hospital I went to heaps as when I was a kid. I was born with cystic fibrosis, so spent a lot of time in hospital as a kid. I'm from Sydney, Australia. This would have been around 1998. When Mum came to visit me, I was around 8. She took me to the cafe in a wheelchair with my drip pole, and it was pretty crowded. So she put me to the side of the cafe, and I happily waited while she ordered me a milkshake and got me a coffee. While she was paying, this doctor, who had an ID stethoscope and everything, bent down to my height and said, "Oh hey, are you for sale? What are you doing sitting here?" I explained I'm with my mum and pointed to her as she was paying. I got a creepy vibe from him. I awkwardly smiled and started coughing heaps, as the antibiotics I was at the time on were very heavy for cystic fibrosis, and it makes you cough a lot. It's not contagious. The doctor kept looking at me and said, "Wow, you're just so beautiful and cute," and then patted me on the leg. Looking back at this now, I'm 30 years old. I'm thinking, what the hell? Mum paid, came and got me, and she could tell I was looking uncomfortable and asked me what the doctor said. She said next time she wouldn't leave me near the magazines and would take me around with her. Safe to say, it kind of scares me now if the doctor is still around. I hope he isn't up to anything sus or disgusting and using authority or a medical degree for something shady. Just to preface, this happened about 9 years ago. And at the time I was very dumb and naive and just about everything. When I was 16, I was in a car accident that left me with some lower back pain. After a few months of physical therapy, my primary referred me to a back specialist at another clinic. My first visit with this elderly doctor, he talked to me for not even 2 minutes, then handed me a hospital gown and said, "Take off all your clothes and put this on so I can inspect your back." I remember asking him if I could keep my bra on and if I needed to take my pants off, and he said, "Yes, everything." So I stripped down to nothing but my thong and put on the hospital gown. He came back to the room and had me stand with my face against the wall as he felt around asking where it hurt. I remember feeling a little embarrassed and uncomfortable as he's rubbing my lower back, and that he could see my whole arse because I was only wearing a thong. Anyway, after we were done, he sat down. Before I'd gotten dressed and said, "Okay, so you want me to write you a script for some oxycodone?" Didn't say anything else about my pain and asked me to come back in a week. Well, a week went by and I remember cancelling my appointment and not bothering to reschedule because I was thinking, if he was just going to give me pain meds, I'm wasting my time. His assistant then called me every week for a few months telling me the doctor was concerned about my pain and wanted me to come back in. You know, hearing this back seems like it's not even a big deal. But the gut feeling I had was that there was an extremely uncomfortable element, and it was really bizarre that he offered me oxycodone at the age that I was when I told him my pain wasn't even that bad and was in fact getting better. Thinking back, I feel like this was creepy and weird and consistently calling me to come back in when I said I didn't need to. I also think it's very strange to have to strip down when I could have just lifted up my shirt. What do you guys think? Sounds like an abuse of power to me. Last Sunday at around 11 p.m, I was simultaneously working in my home office, FaceTiming with my mum and cooking dinner. I live in an Altbau, an old building in German, in Berlin, so the windows only open from the inside and we don't have screens. I had the windows open in the kitchen as we don't have air conditioning and it was a pretty hot night. I was by myself as my boyfriend was at work at a vegan restaurant about 20 minutes down the road. The kitchen window was open and my cats, often like to sit on the windowsill, as there's a decent amount of space for them to do so. The flat is shaped like an L, so the kitchen window forms a corner with the bedroom window. One of my cats, called Hex, enjoys jumping back and forth between these two windowsills. I usually let her do it because she is a cat and I don't want to prevent her from doing any of her catly things. As I was FaceTiming my mum and multitasking the hell out of life, she had jumped to the bedroom windowsill, so I went over to let her back in, as that window was not open. When I went to open the window, I somehow spooked her, and she tried to jump back to the kitchen window, but missed and fell 3 stories down. I saw her slip and look away because I couldn't bear the thought of seeing her dead on the pavement in the backyard below. I screamed something inaudible about my cat to my mum, hung up on FaceTime and then apprehensively looked out the window, only to see her scurry under the hut that contained the garbage cans. So I grabbed my house keys and with my cell phone in hand ran barefoot down the stairs and into the backyard. I was losing my mind. Hex, who had by then tucked herself under a bike, was meowing like crazy, as was my other cat, who I could see silhouetted in the kitchen ledge. My whole body was shaking, and I was thinking to myself, how terrible I am in a panic situation. I shakily Googled emergency vet, called the first number that popped up but got no answer, then the second and a man picked up. I've lived in Berlin for 8 years now, and I am originally from the US. I speak fluent German, but it's still not my native language, and I am still not acquainted with how every little thing works in this country, especially when I am absolutely bricking it at the thought of my cat about to die. The guy on the phone was really odd, but I just thought he had the typical unfriendly attitude relatively infamous for Berliners, so I went with it. He kept telling me to remain calm and get a taxi and to come to his address. I told him I found his address when I found his number, but he told me to call back when I get things from upstairs, as I was ready to take her to him. He kept telling me, "In der Ruhe liegt die Kraft," in the calm you find your strength, and it was not good for the animal to rush her. He also told me I had to pay cash. I told him all I wanted to do was to bring her to him and that I would leave her with him and then go to an ATM. He said no, that he would not accept that, and that I had to drive by an ATM on the way, as it usually costs around €100. Being the panicked moron that I was like, fine. So I brought my cat upstairs, closed the kitchen windows, took what felt like a million years to get the cat carrier down from the top shelf in a closet, as I'm quite short, and the closet door was pinned behind a desk. I put my cat in the carrier and called the man back. He gave me the address and said that on the internet it was his old address. He also told me to call him when I reached his location. We, my cat and I, then got into a taxi and were on our way for what felt like an eternity, before stopping by a bank where I manically searched for my ATM card in a bag full of rubbish because what is organization anyway? I finally got my card after rummaging through the contents of my bag between loyalty stamp cards, receipts, Rizzler filters, and God knows what else while screaming and crying to myself, and I took out €150, hopped back in the taxi, and we went on our merry way. When we finally arrived, I paid the guy, got out, called the man back, and he had originally given me the address of a house on the street. But when I called, he instructed me not to ring any bells, as it was 11 p.m. on a Sunday, and to go to the 2 white double doors on the left of the address I was given. There was no signage on the doors, but suddenly they opened, and a stern, middle-aged looking German man, wearing green scrubs, replied as he opened the door. Now I want to take a second to explain how this clinic looked. First of all, It was a garage in the middle of a row of flats, with no signage to be found that specified that it was an emergency vet clinic. Inside, right when you walk in, there was a makeshift waiting room with an array of ragtag chairs that looked to be picked up from the street, which is quite typical for Berlin, so that necessarily wasn't the strangest part. Further inside, there was an animal gurney in the middle of the room, and a counter to the left with vials and papers on it. It basically looked like an unfinished basement, and behind the man's room across from the gurney was an exposed doorway that was covered up by thick, opaque plastic sheets. Now, you are probably thinking, why didn't I just get the hell out of there? As I said, I am not from Germany, and never in my life have I needed to go to an emergency vet. So I thought this guy was just a night clinic, and he worked out of the goodness of his heart, and most likely had a proper office in the day. I was also crying and panicking and not thinking rationally. He had me set the cat carrier down on the gurney and then open the box. He asked me if she was normally loving and kind, and I said that she was. He began to examine her, then commanded me to hold her down firmly while he examined her back legs. He touched something that made her very unhappy, and she responded by biting down like a vice on my hand. I had severed puncture marks, which I later found out during my trip to the ER, but more on that later, and blood was streaming everywhere. He yelled at me and said if I had not said she was friendly, he would have given me gloves. He also forbade me to panic and told me to remain calm and gave me a paper towel, soaked it in some liquids and pressed down on my wound. At this point, Hex had sprung from the table and hidden under the counter to the left. Now, you are probably wondering why at this point it wasn't obvious to me that this guy was a certified madman. Well, as I said, in Berlin and Germany in general, for us American expats, this kind of grotty behavior is typical in Germany and is usually talked up to being a difference in culture. So I just thought he was being a normal German. Please, no offense, Germans, I love you all, but did think he was slightly off. The thing is, this guy was convincing as hell and kept admonishing me in a way that made me feel like a kid who had done something wrong in school. He got Hex back up on the gurney and told me he could no longer examine her, but he was pretty sure her pelvis was broken. He gave her a shot of some concoction and also gave me 2 liquids, one to give her orally and one to put on her open wound, the same stuff that I had on the paper towel wrapped around my bleeding hand. I asked him if it was like iodine, and he said that it was better than iodine, and that iodine was like a used car and this stuff was like a Ferrari and used for centuries. During this time I noticed 2 burners on the counter that were ringing, which he would pick up, and then they rang and instructed the person, presumably another pet owner in the panicked state with an injured animal, on the other end to do the same as me. I tried to make small talk with him, and he told me he didn't do x-rays and that people had to pay in cash because too many people had skipped out on bills before. He told me about how he did an operation for a dog and was owed 2,000 euros which he never saw. I asked him about Hex and if she would live, and he basically said to me it made 0 sense to bring her to another vet, and if she lived through the night, to bring her to one the next day. He told me based on the fact that she was alive after an hour of being there, it was a pretty decent sign she would live, and that she had a broken pelvis. He then gave me a number and the name of a person to take her to. He said it was a private but reputable vet. He also said not to take her or anyone else that evening because there are heartless people out there who just want to take your money. During this time too, my boyfriend, who I had called in a panic when Hex fell out the window between my call to the vet, he'd called me back and we'd briefly spoken. I told him I was in Pankow, a part of Berlin, and that I would be home soon. I paid the man, gave him my name and address, which is really dumb of me, signed some paper without even really reading it, also dumb of me, and took the medicines he gave me and left. As I left his clinic, he told me to call if I had any questions. 80 euros later, and visibly shaken up with a very injured cat, I wandered up the streets until I found a taxi, got in and went home. When I got there, my concerned boyfriend and I talked about the whole ordeal. I told him about how weird the whole situation was, and my mum called, and we all agreed to get a second opinion. We found a vet clinic on the internet, went there, and we learnt that with that height of a fall, she definitely needed an x-ray, and spent the next hours until morning waiting to hear of her fate. While at the clinic, the vet, the real one, took one look at my swollen hand and told me I needed to go to the ER ASAP, as cat bites can be deadly. Had I listened to the original man, my cat would have already been dead, and God knows what would have happened to me. After leaving the vet hours later, and my boyfriend ended up in the ER, where they gave my wounds a beta-bad, not sure if it's the exact translation, and gave me an antibiotic drip via IV, a tetanus shot, and antibiotics, to take the following days, and the name of the doctor for a follow-up appointment, as well as a splint, which I am still to wear until Saturday when I go for my second checkup, and my thumb is pretty much numb. The next day, when I was calmer and thinking about how odd the situation was that I had encountered, I decided to try and do some internet research, as the whole thing didn't sit well with me. At first, I didn't find much about this guy and then tried Googling him based on the number I had called. And the guy also went by a few names, but eventually I stumbled across more than one online news site with this guy's face plastered across it, and a text explaining that this guy was not a vet and had been arrested no less than 3 times. I even found a Facebook group dedicated to putting this guy behind bars, and a news segment about a couple who were conned by him and lost their dog due to his negligence. Unfortunately, the video never aired, as its scheduled date conflicted with the tragedy that happened in Manchester. I filed a police report and called the police some days later. I was told he has never gone after any previous victim after expressing my concerns about him having my address, and was also told that it made no sense to sue him in civil court because he had no money, but that they are working to put him behind bars again, and that 20 or 30 so people have filed police reports against him. I told the police I would happily testify in court as a witness. He has been the cause of numerous pet-related deaths, but I was also the first human who was injured due to his negligence. The guy has seriously lost the plot ages ago. He also told me, when I said money was no object for the life of my cat, that I should save my money and only feed them raw meat, as the biggest scam in the world is the pet food industry, wet or dry, and gave me all this literature to read. The medicine he gave me was some weird homeopathic stuff. I don't really care about the money, and Hex is doing really well at the real vet, but I don't want this guy hurting anyone, animal or human, again. I can't believe I was alone with a madman near midnight for an hour. I'm only glad that I thought to talk to him. Maybe that's why I'm okay. The cop said he's never gone after a person, but after that cat bite, what if I'd freaked out on him and got scared about me suing and then ended my life or something? No one knew where I was apart from my boyfriend after all. What if I had a dog with me and the bite was even more severe? The guy is life-threatening to humans and animals. That's my story. I honestly can't believe it happened to me. And if I heard this story from someone else, I would scarcely believe it. I am a survivor of being trafficked and every kind of abuse you can imagine. I went into the foster system at age 12, and when I was 16 I fell into a deep depression when I saw my abuser, after being told by Child Protective Services that I would never have to worry about him again. He had been out for a year when I saw him. Shortly after turning 18, my foster parents decided to drop me off at a psych ward because I did not want to go to church camp, as they didn't want to deal with me for a week. I was not a danger to myself nor others. There is more, but here are the highlights. So I was admitted to a psych ward on a Sunday and was seen to by a very kind Indian psychiatrist who prescribed me some antidepressants for my depression and wished me luck in feeling better. I thought perhaps these pills would help me buy back my foster parents' love, who promised to adopt me, which you can still do in the state I live in after you've turned 18. I was happy with my treatment plan. However, I would see the Indian psychiatrist Dr. Adhar, a different one, who was at least a foot taller than me and weighed 100 pounds more, the next day. And that's when the abuse began. He never once gave me eye contact while seeing me. He would repeatedly ask me questions that had no bearing on my case, such as my sexual preference. How are the voices today? He hadn't even asked how we were in the group sessions, to which I replied that they weren't helpful at all, and they were mostly used to connect with your children and to quit smoking. Everything that didn't apply to me, as I was only there for depression. He wanted to change my whole plan and put me on lithium for my bipolar disorder. When I refused, he seemed to get very agitated and would stand up and block the door in the only room. He told me the drug would help with my suicidal thoughts, severe mood swings, sexual confusion, and bipolar disorder. I'm not bipolar, nor sexually confused. And out of the 3 therapists, I've never been diagnosed or even thought of being bipolar. I explained to him that me being bi wasn't sexual confusion. There's not anything wrong with it. He looked directly at me and said, "You would benefit from an electric shock. It would make you normal. It would cleanse you of your bipolar and BPD." I began to sweat. I asked him why he thought I had BPD, and he told me, people with borderline personality cannot sustain relationships because as a child they were too dumb to know the law, so allowed people to abuse them, so they grow up, they push people away in fear that they will be hurt again. And because of this, you turned yourself gay. I corrected him about the relationship thing and told him I had a boyfriend and that we've been happy together for 4 years. He gave this creepy smile, then used my sexual abuse against him. Your stepfather asked you to do it, didn't he? How does your boyfriend feel about having another man's seconds? My face turned bright red. I felt so dirty and scared. The doctor moved right ahead of me and put his hand on my shoulder, pressing his weight on me. I winced from the pain as he leaned in to say, "Many women get used and don't get depressed." I told the doctor that was ludicrous and that I got out from under him and then began to leave. He gave me an eerie warning. "Ignore my professional opinion and I'll get you locked away." I felt terrified, but ignored him, thinking he was just being petty. But it was 2017. Psychiatric abuse no longer happened, right? The next day I was told by one of the workers that since I was doing great, I didn't have to see Dr. Adhar, the one who was terrible, and I was on cloud 9 with that news. That's when I met with the director of nursing, Karen, who gruffly called me to the doctor's office with aggressive finger pointing and a curt, "Get in here." I walked in, and before the door closed, they verbally laid in on me. Both stood over me, leaning towards me, so I had to back up to keep them away from my face. I asked for a chair, and Dr. Adhar said no and instructed me to sit on the ground as he locked the door. Both accused me of not complying with the program because I wasn't taking my medicine, and I'm not seeing the doctor, and I'm not attending group. And why should they keep me here? I was taken aback. I took my medication every morning without complaint. I went to the doctor every day until I was told I didn't have to, and I went to every single group. I told her that the truth came out, and Dr. Adhar had told her I wasn't taking my medicine, meaning the lithium, that I had the right to refuse. And the "you don't have to see a doctor" was wrong, and the doctor said I wasn't attending group because I said it didn't apply to me. Karen wouldn't have it and kept bullying me, raising her voice and threatening to put me on the street. I tried to defend myself. I demanded an advocate, that my foster parents or therapist be put on the phone so they could hear this conversation, and they deny me that, saying they don't need an advocate and that I don't need anyone. Why would I want to drag people into this? It was at that point I was in tears. I hadn't been 18 for a week, and I was only there to make a promise to my adoptive family. I then asked Karen what her name was, and she didn't introduce herself. She shoved her badge into my face, saying, "It's right here, see? Karen, my name's Karen." Completely overwhelmed, I asked for them to call the directors of the group, for not only her witness of my attendance, but full participation in the groups, but they denied that request as well. When I asked why, Karen stated because it's her day off and they didn't pay her to tell her who was in group. She then told me over and over that I'd have to make a choice, comply and take my medicine, see the doctor and attend group, or leave. I calmly tried to explain through my tears that I was taking the medicine that another psychiatrist had given me. This only caused more yelling and accusations. Karen asked why I just didn't take the lithium, and I replied that I've never had a manic episode, and my 3 therapists have never suspected me of bipolar. Karen's only snappy remark was, "Your therapists obviously missed something." At that point I started to break down. I was trapped, began to shake, and I couldn't think. Karen snapped, grabbed me by the shoulder and shook me, warning me to shut up and make a choice, comply or leave. I told her I wanted to leave, but I didn't have a ride home. She went quiet, looking in my eyes, and she called the floor workers in and ordered them to take me to the quiet room, as I was being belligerent. I was so confused when they grabbed me and dragged me into the solitary room. I couldn't see through my tears, and I got triggered after everything that's happened to me in my life, after being locked up by strange men. Hours later, the bad doctor stopped by the window. He watched me for a bit, then left, and I stayed there overnight and only got out because my CPS worker was coming. When it was over, I called everyone I knew, like my parents and therapist. My therapist wouldn't answer, and my foster parents told me, "We haven't had a single day to ourselves without some sort of meltdown or crisis from you. Act like an adult and get yourself straightened out." My now fiance wanted to have some words with Dr. Aha, and he went as far as to learn where he parked his car for work. But I had to convince him not to do anything for my part. I made a formal grievance letter once I got out, but nothing happened. Karen and Dr. Aha still work there, but not long after being released, that psych ward got into the paper for being appalling, dirty and old. I think it's an old facility from the 50s that had very barbaric designs, as the only place patients can be outside is barred. I've since grown a phobia towards any form of doctor, and my foster parents abandoned me to an abusive foster home. Fun times. I had a dentist at this place that was very affordable for us. He was also my mom's dentist. The first appointment was normal, everything went well, other than finding out how messed up my teeth are. My husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, was with me the entire procedure at my request, as I don't really trust people. The second appointment was about a year later. After I'd fully paid off the first, I had to have another tooth removed among many other things. So I'm sitting in the chair at my dentist's, and he walks in and asks where I've been in a playful manner. He said, "I wanted to help you, but you ran away." I laughed and explained, and he said he's glad I returned. He then walked over to me and began stroking my hair and saying, "You're very beautiful. You remind me of my little sister." He then kept petting me. He was way too close for comfort, and I'm not good with physical contact like that. My mind was going a mile a minute. I had that horrible sick feeling in my gut, that kind of feeling screaming that you're in some kind of danger. He was explaining the procedures that we would need while stroking my hair and staring at me. But in my head I kept rationalizing it. Maybe it's because I'm like his sister. Maybe he doesn't get to see her. But why doesn't he get to see her? Maybe she's not in the US. But this still wasn't appropriate to do with your patient. I should say something. I should leave. But what if I'm reading into this too much? No, I've got that sick feeling. I can't be. But what if I am? He'll probably stop soon. My husband will be here soon. A nurse will come by. It'll be fine. It felt like forever, but he stopped pretty quickly and went on to prepare for the tooth removal. He felt it necessary to tell me a few more times how beautiful I am, and that it's a shame I messed up my teeth while being so young, as I was 25 at the time. I shakingly asked for my husband to be brought in now. I had to ask more than once. They nearly started until I said it more firmly. The dentist never answered me. He just stared and walked away to get my husband. They removed the tooth. The dentist actually messed up, slipping and cutting my gum, which made the healing come out kinda weird. I got all the aftercare papers and never went back there again. I told my husband about it and he thought it was weird as hell, reassuring me that I am not overreacting. I thought about reporting the guy, but my anxiety got the better of me. Plus, he didn't really do anything wrong. Maybe. I really just wanted to get the hell away from there and find a new dentist. Haven't even been to the dentist in a while. A lot of big life changes have happened, and I haven't had the time. I told my mum about the dentist thing too, and she just laughed and said he's a weird guy, and that because he's foreign he does things differently, despite never having done anything like that to her. She's always dismissed me like that though, but I'm just happy I'm never gonna return to that place. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's video. We don't often have, I think it's the first time we've got stories of the perspective of a doctor or, medical professional, dentist, vet. I suppose they're all doctors. They are all doctors. But I suppose they are all doctors being seen in a bad light. But I suppose they are all human, and humans are known to do terrible, terrible things, regardless of profession. So there you go. This is a first. I really hope you did enjoy it. As I said before, huge thanks to my wonderful patrons and members. You get some cool perks like picking certain topics and exclusive polls and bonus content and stuff like that for signing up. Obviously, it's completely optional, appreciated, but optional, and you get your name on screen. So thank you everyone who chooses to be a part. Well, I hope you enjoyed the little break. 2 days off, I think I deserved them after producing that beast of a video. I figured that, it's roughly an hour a day, 3 hours. Most of you, I'm guessing, have seen it by now. But if you haven't seen the 100 Ghost Stories special, it is pretty good if I do say so myself. Took a long time to make, and it would certainly mean a lot to me if you would add it to your watch list at some point in the near future. Alright then guys, my voice feels like cardboard, so I think it's a good time for me to sign off. And sorry this video is a bit late. I'm trying to get used to my wife's laptop. It's not the easiest, and halfway through it closed, so I nearly lost one of the stories, which was a bit annoying, but I didn't, so that's good. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.